Hello, everyone. Welcome to another virtual Mysterious Galaxy event. I am Nick, the director of events for the store. Tonight, we have a spooky book for you. So joining us, we have authors Paul Tremblay and Sarah Langan. Hello, you two.
Hey, Nick. Thanks for having us.
Of course. For those who may be tuning in and not know about their backgrounds, Paul Tremblay has been the recipient of the Bram Stoker, British Fantasy, and Massachusetts Book Awards, and is the author of, I'm going to list them as best I can, Survivor Song, Growing Things and Other Stories, The Cabinet at the End of the World, Disappearance at Devil's Rock, A Head Full of Ghosts, and crime novels The Little Sleep and No Sleep Till Wonderland. We have been very fortunate to host Paul in store during the regular years. So we're just very fortunate to have him here for this virtual event. And of course, joining us in conversation, we have Sarah Langan, an award-winning novelist and screenwriter. Her most recent novel is Good Neighbors. And we were also fortunate to have her last year for a virtual event, but still, we're very fortunate. To get a little bit of housekeeping out of the way, if you haven't noticed already, there's a link below that says buy the Pallbearers Club and get a signed book plate, because Paul has been wonderful and has provided book plates for everyone who buys not only the Pallbearers Club, but if you want to purchase any of his backlists, I'm pretty sure we can, sneak a book plate in those too. On that same website, you can also purchase a copy of Good Neighbors by Sarah Langan. So please go ahead and support her too. And if you haven't also, actually quite a bit of you have noticed, the Ask a Questions link below. If you have any questions, go ahead and submit there and they'll be asked later on. I'm going to go ahead and disappear for now and let these two discuss this book right here, which I must say, looking at the blurbs on the back by some wonderful authors, one of the best, most intriguing horror novels I've read in years by Christopher Golden. The most beautiful and heartbreaking funeral I've been in a long time. Grady Hendrix, love him. And who is this? The most audacious, Paul Tremblay at his most audacious best by Sarah Langan. Oh,
best blurb writer.
Yes.
I was making fun of my blurbs today. So I was like, why couldn't I have done a better blurb for this? It's such a good book.
That blurb.
So.
Well, thank you.
All right, everyone. I'm going to disappear, but I'll see you all at the end of the event.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Paul. I just want to start by saying that I love this book. And
thank you.
Thank you. So I read it for the second time, and it reminded me a lot of reading The Keep for the second time. I don't know if you've read that book by Jennifer Egan, but it's sneaky and it's smart, and there's a lot going on, and your heart gets broken in new ways as you read it. And so I think everyone here is in for a treat when they read this book. And I wish we could do a book club. I do. I want you all to read it, and then we come back next month, because there's so much to talk about and there's so many questions I have, but we can't do that. So we won't do that.
Yeah, we'll try. We won't spoil much of anything.
No. But it's great. And then, so do you want to set it up a little bit before we talk about it?
Yeah, sure. So it's so the book is presented as the found memoir of a character who calls himself Art Barbara. But the first line of the book is, "I am not Art Barbara." In his memoir, he says he renames everybody. And the memoir picks up in the late 80s when he's a senior in high school, not a very popular or socially adept kid. And he also has some physical surface issues, acne, but he also has like bad scoliosis and things like that. Anyway, so the title comes from, he starts, I'm so bad at describing my own book, but but the title is a reference to, he starts what's called a Pallbearers Club because he's desperate for extracurricular activities. I don't know, Sarah, if you remember, because we're a similar age. I'm a little bit older, I guess, unfortunately. But the getting into college thing is so different now than it was then. Then, I think I rolled out of bed and took the SATs. There was no prep. There wasn't the stress around it. So anyway,
I had nothing else to do, so I prepped. On Saturday nights, I was like, I guess I'll take an SAT prep because I have nowhere else to be. Anyway,
yeah. No, I just didn't do that. But so Art came, was like, oh, I don't have any extracurricular activities. So he starts the Pallbearers Club, where he volunteers at a local funeral home to serve elderly and homeless that don't have any living relatives, which is a really sweet thing to do, but also a horror story. So hardly any classmates join, and a strange older woman joins. I guess we'll stop there for.
Yeah. So a couple of things, like what I noticed that was really cool is you have Art Barbara have these physical manifestations of a sickness. It's like body horror, and you can't always do that because it makes it seem as if someone who has a disability is bad because of that disability. But the way that you do it works and is successful because it's internal. And you keep wondering, you know, it's sort of self-generated because he's not doing the exercises he's supposed to do, and he's not doing the things. And there's so much going on with that that's really interesting. And you like, you're like, people have been like, the back of this book, you're like, I'm Art Barbara, but I'm not Art Barbara. Yeah. I'm like, you're not Art Barbara, I don't think at all.
No? Oh.
Are you?
Well, I mean, a lot of this, the surface stuff of the book is like, I mean, I would say the high school stuff especially is very close to the to the bone. I mean, slightly exaggerated, I suppose, but in terms of like the body stuff, I mean, I had bad scoliosis, and like as it's described in the book, I won't go into too much detail, but you know, having to wear a brace and then the surgery, you know, that physically, literally transforms the character, right? Which is sort of an interesting part. Like here's someone like as a character, he's yearning for some sort of change, even though he can't describe to himself what it is necessarily. It's just that like general longing that so many of us have, especially, you know, people who's almost everybody, you know, feels like they don't know who they are or they want to be somebody different, especially in high school. But, you know, he's someone who actually gets a physical transformation just by the very fact that they straighten his spine out. You know, eventually he's going to, you know, grow out of some of the other stuff. But so that, I won't say it's like a gift, but that's sort of like dropped on him, which is kind of weird, you know, to go through, which, you know, I hope worked in the book. You know, hopefully it reads as true because it's something I went through.
Oh, it does. And
yeah.
I was going to ask you about the research you did for it because it feels so real. I've been rereading Stephen King and I got mad because like when Louis Creed digs up Gage or Gabe, whatever his grave, it's so you believe it because he did all the research for it. And I feel the same way about this story where it's just like you're telling like street blocks of where things are happening, and your descriptions are great. And then you have these adjectives that are verbs that you turn into, you know, like nouns that you turn into verbs, but they're really well done and funny. And it's very specific voice. There's this feeling about art that feels very adolescent to me, which is you're never closer to death than you are when you're a teenager. Does that make any sense to you? Does that feel?
Yeah, no, definitely. I don't know, like in so many ways as teenagers, you know, we're sort of like convinced that, oh, like whether like we're experiencing something for the first time, it's like, it's super intense. Why isn't everyone else feeling this? Or you feel like you discovered a secret that no one else has discovered. And that's not to say that they're wrong either. Like it's really been interesting, especially my daughter, Emma, who's so open with her emotions, to see her, like those sort of teen things, those teen discoveries, you know, and how she reacts to them. And you know, as a child, she was deathly afraid of death. You know, like to the point where she would wake up like with like night anxiety terrors and things like that. So I don't know. I think there's, let me say it this way. I think I'm always interested in writing. I've been around teens forever, but I think, I don't know how you feel this way, but like I'm losing memories of specific events, it seems like. I think we all do. I mean, if you live long enough, there's just not enough space for all the memories. But I feel like I vividly remember like the emotional life of the teen me. And really just like the, I don't know, you know, for lack of a better phrase, the bipolar experience, not saying it's clinically bipolar, but like the idea of like these intense highs and intense lows that is the teenage brain.
It's burned there. I would say I don't. Like, honestly, I'm back in my hometown right now for this weekend, and
yeah,
I can't figure out what's true and what's narrative. You know, this story you tell yourself to make it to the next day. or to like do the thing that you want to do, as opposed to, you know, I think so much of memory is like a collection, and you cherry pick what you want so that you can justify the next thing, which I feel like you really get to in this novel. That's so much of it. For those of you who are just starting to read it, you have Art Barbara, and then you have Mercy, who is this reader of the book, who the book is really about, and she's constantly contradicting everything he says. And you're like, is this real? Like, is he freaking out? Is, you know, and then the story itself starts to get, you wonder which character is telling the truth. Yeah. And there's a great monster in it. I can say that, right? That's okay.
Yeah.
It's so good. Like, and it's so apt. And honestly, I don't get scared when I read horror. I think it's funny usually and fun. Like, I don't get scared. This was actually scary because it was resonant on a nightmare level and like a hive mind. And also because it dovetails so well into what's happening in Art Barbara's real experience and his behaviors. There's one specific thing that I can't talk about, but it's like, it's so heartbreaking because his intentions and what he's doing are so opposite. And the manifestation of that is so upsetting. That you read it and you just put the book down for a second. You're like, did that happen? I reread it, you know?
Well, thank you. I'm honored. Yeah. You know, it's funny. There's a balance. I mean, I want the book to feel. I want a lot of the book to be somewhat humorous, but I also want. But I want the funny parts, the self-deprecating parts, to be the funny parts, and not the horror to be funny. Because usually, if you say horror comedy, it's the horror that's the source of the comedy. I know. I'm more interested. I mean, which I enjoy horror comedies, but like, I don't know. I like it when someone can do a horror comedy where it's, hey, it's horror when it's horror. It's funny when it's funny. You know, it's never described as a horror comedy, but I think Get Out is actually quite funny at times and so horrifying.
Yeah.
No one calls it a horror comedy because I think that in some eyes would like devalue it, which I'm not saying does, because I think it's hard to think of like books or movies that are funny when they're supposed to be and scary when they're supposed to be.
But I think both in Paul Bearer's Club and Get Out, the comedy that you're using is in order to make it scarier. Like, because nothing is real that's not funny. Like in real life, if you're stressed out, you make a joke. Everybody makes jokes. The more upset and anxious you are, you make jokes. So in Get Out, like if it had been the same tenor or the Paul Bearer's Club, people wouldn't believe it. But you have these jokes throughout that people are like, yeah, that's familiar. That's familiar. Oh no, this other thing happened.
Yeah.
And that's not familiar. And I'm unmoored completely in ways I hadn't expected.
Wow. Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm curious because you said the second time you read it, poor Sarah, for everybody out there. She was one of the few like beta readers for this book. So she read this big giant blob mess.
Big,
that was
right?
like,
it was a lot longer, wasn't it?
It was 30 pages longer, 10,000 words longer. Yeah. Yeah. It's better now for sure.
It's still the same heart, you know, of the narrative.
Yeah. The same heart from Art Barbara.
Okay, so how did you do research on the real Mercy Otis?
Yeah, let me see if I have it. Yeah, so when you asked about research, that was really the main part of it. And this isn't a big spoiler because Art and Mercy end up telling the story of Mercy Brown on like page 60, or the historical Mercy Brown, I should say. You know, I'm not necessarily saying that the character Mercy Brown is Mercy Brown, but so I use this book as my main text, Food for the Dead by Michael E. Bell. Because when I went online, like even the Smithsonian, just about everything that I read online that talked about Mercy Brown and her being exhumed in 1892, having her heart removed, burnt, and then her brother drank it to cure him of consumption, with what is we know is tuberculosis. And this had actually happened like 40-ish times. Excuse me, sorry, I'm drinking a soda over here.
What kind of soda, by the way? Just a quick.
It's not really soda. It's bubbly, sparkling water, so it's not actually soda. It's not like grape soda. That would be.
I thought it was
Paul,
grape
don't
soda.
drink grape soda.
Continue, but I was like, all right, he's bringing the grape soda.
But yeah, so every online place referred back to his books. I was like, oh, I should read his book. I mean, so it's not all Mercy Brown. It's a whole bunch of, as I mentioned, he's sort of uncovered like 40 different cases of this weird corner of New England folklore, which, like, how did I not know about this? Like, I didn't know about it until I started randomly searching for stuff when I had the idea for the Pallbearers Club. Because the idea that you exhumed, like, tuberculosis would run through rural families, or, I mean, that seems to be where it mostly happens in terms of like this take out the heart, burn it kind of thing. And the superstition of, oh, this person who died early or first is coming back and feeding on the rest of the family. You know, there was never ever mention of the word vampire until much later, until we started getting it, kind of thing. They just thought this person was coming back, making them sicker from the grave somehow. And anyway, the superstition of taking the heart out, burning it, and have someone drink the ashes, you know, as of right now, Michael Bell and other folklorists have not been able to trace it back to either indigenous, you know, lore or even European as well. It seems to be like this weirdly New England thing.
And where did it happen?
So like, well, Mercy was in Exeter, Rhode Island, you know, so not too far from Providence. And, you know, the best part is, like, yeah, I quoted directly from the Providence Journal. It's just wild that you can look up the Providence Journal, and they're talking about like these, you know, and they're, you know, it's really, they're talking down to the rurals, like saying these are, you know, beastly people to exhume, you know, and believe in the superstition. It's a very negative sort of coverage, but they covered it like 3 different days. Yeah, so it's really wild.
Yeah, yeah. And then, like, who ate the hearts though? Like, what?
So in Mercy's case, like, for her mother died and her older sister died fairly close to each other, and then I think Mercy was like a year later. And of course, because the older brother was sick, they had to save the boy. They had to save the man, not the women. But it's pretty clear the father, who was obviously racked with grief, didn't believe it. Like, I think he was just so like shook with grief. He was like, whatever, it doesn't matter to me. So it was more like the people in the surrounding Exeter, from what I remember, got it done. And even the doctor was skeptical, but there was enough people to say, hey, let's try it. They uncovered the mom and Mary, her sister, first, and the mom was totally desiccated. And because Mercy was so recently dead, you know how decomposition works, her heart was actually full of blood. It was purple with blood. That was the test. If you unburied somebody and if their heart was filled with blood, oh, they're coming back at night and feeding. Yeah. So the poor brother had to drink the heart.
Like, it probably smelled, you know, it was probably like crunchy.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like,
right. Yeah.
That coagulated.
Right. Yeah. I was like, it's not like they had a blender. They just burnt it in like ashes. Yeah. There must have been some leftover, like, grisly chunks. Didn't cover that in the book, though.
You might get a little bit of hepatitis out of that. So it also, so the Pallbearers, like, club, how did you come up with that? Like, this club that...
Yeah. So that was like a pure, like, writer's luck, like, just happened to fall into my lap. It was November of 2019. I just turned in Survivor Song, and I was frankly thinking I was going to take a months long break. I was kind of exhausted by that book and Cabin. I wrote them really close together, and both were like super intense and super intensely actively engaging in the awful political now. So I was like, I need a break, a mental break. Not knowing what I would do next, but I figured I'd figure it out in the spring. So I was at a school-wide assembly at my school, not paying attention because it was Monday morning, half asleep. But this really sweet senior went up, you know, a very introverted kind of kid, went up to the front of the school and said, hey, I'm starting this club, the Pallbearers Club. And I instantly sat up and said, what? You know, when he described it like the professional adult teacher, me was like, oh, what a sweet, nice, you know, community service kind of thing. But like the horror writer in me is like, oh, I have to use this.
It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, there are other Pallbearers clubs. Like, I don't think he didn't like create it out of whole cloth. I did like a quick Google search and found there was references to other similar volunteer sort of organizations. but because it was this, quiet, reserved kid that went up there, I instantly thought about myself. It's like, geez, could I have done that in high school? And I was like, oh, there's no way. And then instantly appealed to me. It's like, oh, instead of, I want to go inward instead of like the previous two books, which were very much about everything else going around me. Go inward and get to like tell like a longer story, at least time wise. Yeah, so those were the seeds.
I wrote creation of a small world to eliminate a larger one is one of my favorite techniques, and I think the most effective. And I was thinking that as I read the Pallbearers Club, where it's like you have this completely enclosed world, but it's about much more than that. But it's simple, deceptive, not really simple. And I liked that. I think people are trying to answer the political upheaval in right now in ways that they can't because we're all too close to it. Right. And I think the more you just tell the most honest story you can, the more likely you are to actually be able to tell something true.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm definitely drawn to the smaller stories within the wider story. As much as I, say I didn't engage the political now, I mean, that stuff's going to go into your book. I mean, there are parts that I know, like that is so like pandemic, like inflected or informed, that I remember writing. I would say similar to what you did with Good Neighbors. Like, you have this really small neighborhood. You made it both feel claustrophobic and huge with all the different families, but how it sort of that like tightens throughout the novel was really, I don't know, a masterful job.
Thanks. I don't know how I did it.
Yeah. Well, you were like write draft after draft after draft and sort of hone in. Like I almost imagine you as almost like a sculptor takes like this big piece of rock and then you just sort of like, because I feel like in a totally different way. You sort of like chisel, go away, and then you've got like this amazing thing by the end.
I don't even know what I'm doing, but like,
yeah.
But yeah, no, I draft and then I'm like, this is garbage. No, I was like texting you 2 weeks ago when I had COVID and reading my book, being like, why did I write such a bad book? Wait.
Did you feel differently after COVID? Maybe I was just like a little COVID feeling poorly.
I was sick. My husband was like, don't read your book while you're sick.
Yeah, that's a bad idea.
Yeah. There's so much that's good in here. Thank you. Do you want to talk a little bit about the character Mercy?
Sure. Like as her function or just like who she is?
Yeah, like who she she's like sort of the funny levity in places. Yeah. And she also she kind of lightens him up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, she's there to punk. Yeah. So I mean, a lot of so for me, there was a couple of starting points. One was almost just like a logic through game for me. Was okay. It's a found memoir. Who found it? So Mercy found it. What's she going to do with it? Once I sort of knew what story or what the memoir of art might look like, it's like, oh, she's going to have to like have some sort of say in this. She's going to want to respond at the end of each chapter. And then I figured it'd be a fun part of her personality to not even like resist writing in the comments like an editor would, kind of thing. But at the same time, people got this book, so Mercy published it, right? It wouldn't exist otherwise. So I mean, part of the fun with her character, I thought, was even though you're getting her first person, she really doesn't tell you very much about herself at all. It's more you learn about her through her interaction with art almost solely, right? And she's definitely there to call art his bullshit because he's maudlin. He's like a early 90s alternative indie song that's like very mopey, and if it was just art, I think people would be like, stop with the whining art. No, so she's there and I think, she does help him as much as maybe she hurts him. So I was kind of excited to write about like a different kind of friendship. But Survivor Song was this really like healthy, a helpful friendship with Rams and Natalie, sort of the friendship that we all dream of having with other people. But Art and Mercy is a very different kind of, yeah, very, I don't know what I'm saying, but a very different kind of friendship. One that's, maybe, borderline toxic for as much as that word is overused or underused. I don't know. but it's the kind of friendship where they're so intense when they're together and they're so into each other, but they're not good for each other if they spend too much time together, even though they are good for each other probably initially. And then it's the kind of thing that, they don't talk for a long time, but they pick right up and fall into that same pattern. So I don't know. I wanted to write about like this weird, maybe we're not so great for each other, but, can't quit each other kind of friendship.
I thought that was one of my favorite things about the TV show Girls, because like female friendships were either represented as like we were bitches to each other, or we were like super sweet, but Girls was familiar, where it was like, no, we're just insane because we're in our 20s, and we don't know what we're doing, and we're trying to steal each other's boyfriends sometimes, and it's awful, like, and I think that just for whatever reason doesn't get the airtime, or it hasn't until the last 10 years or so.
I mean, I think anything that's too discomforting, I don't know. I'm in a sort of a lower ebb in like my feelings on Hollywood at this point, but just in terms of like what they're willing to show, they just seem to be going so safe and even more safe. Obviously, I mean, there's great stuff that gets made, but I would say like on the whole, that just even talking to producers and stuff, it doesn't seem like there's not a lot of like chance taking in the sort of like in what they're looking for. But
I don't see it. They need the happy endings. They need us to say God exists, and like there's a real hypocrisy in it, because when this is going to go dark, but when Uvalde happened and Mission Impossible was released, and no one was like, these things shouldn't go together. It's not funny. Like this glorification of guns. And like everybody in Hollywood is like, oh, we're a liberal. We're so liberal. We don't believe in that. Except that's all we do is glorify violence. And we never show what real violence is, because that's upsetting. And it might, audiences might not want to be involved in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of like further, this is something I've just been thinking about, because I've actually really enjoyed Stranger Things, the new season. My daughter loves it, so like, I was like, I'm going to watch it so we can talk about it. And it was fun, but like, without spoiling things, I mean, this isn't I won't name any characters, but like, talk about happy endings. A lot of times in Hollywood, a happy ending is achieved because a character dies for the rest of the characters, right? Sacrifices themselves. So the other characters go on, and we're sad for a minute, but they're like happy because the other band gets to go on. And the older I get and the more, I don't know, I've been thinking about story and how it relates to what you talked about, like what we're going through. That's a horror to me, an absolute horror. It seems like such a Christian capitalist, not to go too far down that road, but like mindset that no, you have to sacrifice people for the rest of us to continue on and be happy. Which, fine, maybe any sort of society or civilization this large, the only way for it to function is to have some level of grinding people in their gears. But like, man, do we need to celebrate it in story? Like, how about we have some people rebel or against that notion, which is partly, I think, in retrospect, why I did the ending of Cabin at the End of the World the way I did. I wanted those two fathers to be like, this is wrong. We're not going to do this. Anyway, I don't know. Way off topic, I guess, but.
No, I get it. But because I think we both deal with things where we're trying to tell a story, and we're trying to talk about real horror and what that feels like. And it's frustrating when people are like, I couldn't finish reading this, I was so upset, or whatever it is. And it's like, what? I don't understand the purpose of reading. If like, why are you reading? Like, and narrative is how we shape our reality. It is. And it's how we see everything. Narrative is sort of like the externalized memory of an individual, only as a collective. And the more we corrupt it with this nonsense, the worse things go. But we should stop that and go back to this before we. Okay. I loved Mr. Stevens. You can talk about Mr. Was there any? Was that after Stephen Graham Jones or?
No, that's funny. Like, I think I might have. Because my agent is named Stephen Barbara, like he was really happy when he heard about Art Barbara. I was like, oh, I didn't really actually name him after you. I literally saw the name Art Barbara on wallpaper at the Graduate Hotel in Providence. It used to be the Biltmore, but they've remade the rooms to be like hipster rooms, and the rooms are wallpapered with like fake libraries, and there was some book on there that said something about Art Barbara, and that name just struck me as so funny. You know, Art Barbara. So I think I included my agent's name as Mr. Stevens. I think initially I changed Mr. Stevens, but initially he was going to be Peter Straub in my head. But then I changed him to Dr. Sampson, who I worked for at Providence College. And his personality was very much sort of infused into Mr. Stevens. Dr. Sampson. I did co-op. I worked at what was called at the time the Office of Minority Student Affairs. This was like 1993. And I worked in Dr. Sampson's office, and he was just a really nice guy, always offering advice, and you know, he was great with all the, you know, the students that came in. So yeah, most everybody, like I said, not everything is like 100% autobiographical, but a lot of it is pieces there that they're turned and flipped around. Because when you said, you know, that why do we read, why do we write, this book was sort of my exploration of that in some ways. Like I had become convinced right before I started this novel, because I don't know, we're asked all the time, why do you write horror? Why do you write horror? Or what? Or just even why do you write? Which I don't mind answering those questions. It's just, you know, I don't know. Like it just feels like this is who I am, you know. But I became convinced, oh, like so many people, I had like, you know, a really miserable high school experience. I think I write because I'm trying to prove to that teenager always stuck in me that he has something worth saying. So that book was really sort of my approach to it. Now that's done, like I kind of hope I would maybe get rid of some of that like interior, the bad stuff, the bad parts of that, which didn't really happen, but I'm very happy with the book.
Yeah, I thought he was really believable. I didn't think he was so, you know.
Art Barbara. Yeah. Yeah. It's been fun seeing the reactions to him. You know, initially I saw some people like, oh, he's like, you know, so annoying, like stop complaining, which I totally get. But, you know, again, that's like Mercy's role. So, yeah, so it's been a little weird, but I'm glad seeing people's reactions to Art. And I've been seeing actually some fun reactions.
Wasn't that like 30% of high school boys acted like that though? Like back to you, but like.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. The ones that weren't on like the football team and stuff.
Well, then they were in bands in college and they were like, I'm brooding.
Right. Yes. Yeah. The brooding. Yeah. I joined the radio station.
You put John Langan in there too.
Yeah. And I put Mr. Bruguez, Alejandro Bruguez is he the, wait a minute, what is he? He's the, what do you call him? Guidance counselor, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
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 Yeah, put some fun people in there. Emily Danforth is an English teacher in there briefly too. I don't know if you read Emily Danforth's Plain Bad Heroines, but it's great. Oh, you got to read that.
All right. I will. Gaslighting is big in this story. And I loved it because it's done so well.
Oh,
and I don't
thank
think you can say too much about it, but there's like, this is like, it's this intertextual like stuff going on and gaslighting where you're like, wait, which person is telling the truth and which person is lying? And then like, I feel like this one person is telling the truth, but I don't know for sure. So
yeah. Thank you. I won't say anything that like, I think you can certainly read it and be like, well, geez, maybe they're both, or maybe they both think they're telling the truth. I mean, that they've been in this story for so long, like their lives. Like, I think even Mercy says in her first entry, says something to the effect of like, hey, you know, just because our accounts differ, and this is before the whole book, so maybe she doesn't know how much of what's coming that's potentially there. You know, she says, even if our accounts differ, that doesn't necessarily mean one of us is lying.
Yeah.
Which to me was like, I wanted that to be like, hey, that's sort of like the footing of their friendship. That's where sort of they're starting from, kind of.
And yeah. And that's kind of a gaslight in itself, though, because I think there's, you know, people can say that and they're like, well, we have two different versions of the conversation, and it's like, well, but maybe one of them's right. And one of them
no, that's true. That's a good point. I don't think I have a great definition for gaslighting. Everyone says it. I'm like, I think I know what that means. I'm just kidding. I'm gaslighting everybody now.
I can say one thing about a thing later in the thing because I'm not spoiling anything. You make a reference to the monster at the end of this book, which is great. I loved
Oh,
it.
thank you. Oh, I love that book. I hardly ever teach writing. I did a summer class last summer for a Long Island college, Stony Brook.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was all online. It was wonderful. It was a week-long class. I had amazingly talented students. But one of my presentations was using postmodernism and horror kind of thing. And I basically went through, there's a marker at the end of this book. I read it to them and deconstructed each page like I was an obnoxious like English professor or something. I don't know. It was a lot of fun. I think that book is reading it as an adult. I was like, oh yeah. I see what they're doing. I
went that far with it.
I know. So part of it was like a little absurd. It was fun just to like treat like this kid's book so seriously in a way too. It was like a nice break in the week-long Zoom sessions.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry. Again, way off topic.
We've covered a lot of what I wanted to talk about. Just the writing is so good. And let's see. Hiding in basements. Like people who hide in basements. I think that's a generational thing that's interesting. And I think it like there's a lot of stuff that's going on in Paul's book where it's like levels of a house and sort of levels of the consciousness that were fun.
Yeah, I wonder if it's got to be geographic too, right? Because not everywhere, I'm certain in this country, let's limit it to here, has basements. But I don't know. We're filthy with them in New England, and probably Long Island too. I don't know. I've always part of it, it's like part of the horror like appeal. Like there's that gut, almost kid and lizard brain reaction, right? Like the fun part of horror is like, let me tell you a brief story this way. We rented a cabin like a week and a half ago. Took my mom with me and Emma and one of her friends, and I didn't learn my lesson. Rented a cabin with no Wi-Fi. Oops. But anyway, so my mom one night while we're playing cards said, "Have you guys seen the glowing orange balls in the shower sink or the shower drain?" And we're like, "What? Nana, is it time for bed?" And she's like, "No, really." She thought we were gaslighting her. It's like, no, like she'd been talking about dreams. Like maybe you dreamed it. Like, we're like, "Oh, Nana, sorry." Then like a few mornings later, I was getting up early to try to write before everybody else got up. I was writing. My mom came through to go to the bathroom. I didn't really notice. And then she's like, "Paul, come to the bathroom." I'm like, I forgot what she had said before.
Was she waiting just for you? She was like, "My son."
No, we gaslighted her. She's like, "Oh, I must not have seen it." So she called me into the bathroom. I totally forgot. I was look at the shower drain, and the shower drain was glowing orange. And I was like, "What?" But I was like, not freaked out, but like really excited. It's like, whoa, like, so, some of the horror is like, that. And then, we figure out, oh yeah, there's a little space under, like this bathroom is right next to the exterior and there's a little space underneath and the sun is rising. And this is like the only time of the day where the sun hits and it hits the PVC pipe and makes it glow. Or it's like some weird glowy thing.
Or like radon doesn't glow, right? You can't.
No. I'm going to go with the sun. Anyway, so there's that part of it, but like, I don't know, like the adult part of it is like what we were talking about, where we want stories that are difficult, that challenge the reader, that transgress, that poke and prod, that make me feel I want to be uncomfortable. I don't know. I feel like I don't know if I learn anything from it, but I always want to know how characters react to those situations, right? Where horror is the exposing of awfulness, the exposure of terrible things, but I find hope in that recognition between the reader and the writer. Oh, like we recognize that this is bad, whether or not we're going to survive it. I don't know. I still find hope in that. So I don't know. It's kind of, for me, it's the combo of the excitement of the glowing drain with the other stuff.
Yeah, no, I need it named. Like, I feel like anything that doesn't name it, anything that skirts over it just feels like lies to me. And I can't tolerate lies. We have 13 questions.
Okay.
So
before we go to those, can I ask you about, you mentioned the book that, that you COVID texted, which is a variation on drunk texting, someday, I guess, but COVID texting. This is terrible. So can you tell us about that book?
Texts, it's like, it's still bad. And you were like,
but to be fair, you were saying that about Good Neighbors in the early going too.
Yeah,
and Good Neighbors is an amazing novel, one of the best in the last couple of years for sure. So what about the new one? What's up? Or where is it? What's it doing?
It's actually, I'm going to be able to hand it in, when I was supposed to. So at the end of September. And it's good. It's sort of an idea of a company town and a family that makes their way into the company town that's walled off, and where the top 0.1% of people live across the globe. And when they get in, they find out it's not what they thought it was. So it's kind of like a little bit of Shirley Jackson, a little bit of Ira Levin.
Nice. I just read Ira Levin for the first time. Like, I'd seen movies, but I'd never read Rosemary's Baby.
It's so clean.
Yeah. And I couldn't believe how much they were the same as the movie.
You don't even have to change anything. You just hand that to Polanski and he can do it. And the same with, it's so good. I thought it was, but I don't want to short shrift people because they've got, this is so many questions. I got to scroll through. Oh, they get votes, Paul.
Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Tremblay, big fan. I was wondering if you might be able to answer how much outlining you do before you start a story. From Jackson Robinson.
So short stories I don't outline. I keep little notebooks. Do I have any around here? Yeah. I keep little notebooks. This seems like bizarre. I have this one here still, but like it's like my head full of ghosts notebook. That one actually didn't outline, where I just like write notes and stuff, like most people do. But I would say for most of my novels, because I feel least comfortable with plot, that I don't feel like I'm going to be able to make it up as I go. I for most of my novels, I've written like a 8 to 10 page plot summary. And sometimes they get vague. Like with Survivor Song, I really only probably wrote like a 3-page summary of just the first 100 pages because I thought those were going to be the trickiest. But with Paul Bear's Club, it was a necessity to get a book deal again because I was off deal. We pitched my publisher, Paul Bear's Club, so they needed 30 pages of manuscript and a summary. So I had to write one. So, I find like a comfort. It's nice to have them. But for me, it's also fun. Like when I get to deviate from it, like when something changes and, and it goes in a different direction. That's fun too.
I actually I find them really hard because like, I like having them on my own and outline, but whenever I have to give it to a partial to a publisher, it like breaks me because then everyone's like, this is really good. We love this. We love this 100 pages. Keep it just as it is. And I'm like, and then I just feel trapped. Like I'm like, my feet are, stuck in cement. So I don't know. I don't know if you have that where you're like, but I want to change the whole beginning, but everybody loves them. They're telling me not to change the whole beginning. Like I just,
Yeah. I mean, again, I think some of it comes down to just like, we work so differently. Like my 30 pages, pretty much those are the 30 pages. I mean, there's going to be stuff rewritten, but in terms of like, just because I edit so much as I go, especially the beginning and at the start of a book, I go really slowly, probably like 250 words a day, if that. And, I start the next day by, editing the previous day. And if it's a book, I usually go through the start of the chapter. I don't know. I feel like more like the feeling you were describing. I can't like leave something like I think is an utter mess and go forward. I have to treat it like, I don't know, like really good scaffolding. Like, oh no, that's going to be there. It's going to be strong enough to hold the rest of it up. I can't move on unless I think it's that way.
I get that. Yeah. All right. Paul in the hot seat. Next question. What are your favorite and least favorite horror stereotypes? What can be considered classic and what's overdone? From Julia.
Yeah, you should give an answer to that too. I mean, I think I talked about one of them where it's like, hey, we have to sacrifice a character for everybody else as a least favorite horror stereotype. I mean, but that's sort of just like a general Western storytelling thing at this point, or certainly US. I don't know. I mean, I think some of the stuff that's obviously, misogynistic and racist, where it's like the other comes to the town, has to be defeated. But it's also been really interesting to see that done by writer, own voice writers like Erin. Jeez, is it Erin Andrews? I'm a terrible person. I think her last name is Andrews. Is a Black author, and she has a horror coming to home novel called Jackal, and it's done in a really interesting and much different way, in an exciting way. So like, you know, every trope you can throw out there, there's also, I'm excited. I always get excited when I see something I didn't think I would like trope wise and done in a cool way. I mean, that, I don't know how else would it happen? Because there's only so many horror stories you can tell, right? Oh, do you have any that jump off the page for you that are least favorites?
I don't like when women come to realize that everything's actually okay, or everyone really did love them, or, you know, like they just like they come to be women. They become fully realized women by the end of the story. And it's surprising if you think about it in that context, how many horror novels do that.
Yeah. It's not a horror novel, but I reread 3 books before I started Paul Bear's Club just to get me in the mood. And one of them is Sarah Levine's Treasure Island with 3 exclamation points. That's one of the funniest fucking books ever written. Because one of my favorite kind of novels, I'm sure there's an actual academic name to it, but one of my favorite novels is I call first-person asshole narrator novels, where, you know, the narrator is not good at what they do, and they're really kind of a train wreck. You know, something like Confederacy of Dunces or the books that Sam Lipsyte write. But you know, what you said reminded me of Sarah's novel, because it seems so few publishers would allow a woman to be the first-person asshole narrator who's making all these mistakes and making people uncomfortable. So I would recommend that. It's not horror, but yeah, you definitely should check that book out.
That sounds good. Yeah, they do have an issue with I don't think they can see it themselves. It's so inherent, the bias of what that is. All right, next question. So excited to hear from you both. I'm curious what your favorite gruesome horror books are. From Anna. Gruesome.
Exquisite Corpse by Poppy C. Bright, now Billy Martin. Actually, I mentioned to you before we got on, Connor Habib's new novel, Hawk Mountain, is that's rough. I mean, it's really good, but like he gets into some gritty stuff. And that came out July 5th. And Eric LaRocca's fiction, I would say, qualifies as some really gruesome but amazing fiction.
I don't think I noticed gruesome, or maybe I don't read it. Like I just pass over blood and guts and like popped out eyes.
Yeah, all right.
I read Pet Sematary last month and I loved it though. That's probably gruesome, maybe.
Yeah, that's gruesome.
Yeah, I'd say that is. Thanks so much for making this event happen. Curious about Paul's and Sarah's writing process. Are they plotters or pantsers? What does the revision process look like after draft 1 is complete? And which do they prefer, drafting or revising? From Nathan Gray.
Yeah, because I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but I definitely, it's not even what I prefer. I mean, I wish I could just like spill it all out, because I enjoy having a full draft and going through it. To me, that's like one of the few parts of writing that I enjoy. I mean, the rest of it's work. I mean, for the most part. So I'm stuck being sort of an editor as I go.
I'm like a pantser, but then I kind of do the same thing. I rewrite the same opening. Maybe I've probably done it 500 times so far.
Whoa.
You know, on Mom's Night Out, first 100 pages. Yeah, no, it's like playing Swanee River, like Ed Norton. You know, and
so when you rewrite it, do you like start with like blank file on your computer and actually rewrite, or you know, you're just going through it?
I'll print it, because there's that, like, I just know, like, I know where the end is, but I can't figure out exactly all the combinations. And sometimes I get a little too ambitious, like I need to peel things back in order to make it work. And I kind of just, it's like, say there's, you know, it's like there's probably 1,000 different permutations, and I'm just sitting there going, which is the permutation? Which maybe I'll try this permutation. It's crazy. It's like a nut thing. I wish I were more efficient.
No, I mean, the end result's amazing, so keep doing it.
You know, every 20 years, I'll
So, well, quick one. How different for you is screenwriting then? Do you approach it similarly, or?
So when I did the pilot for Good Neighbors, I had help. Like, had these producers who did the work with me, and they just, you know, they paid me good money, and I had a deadline. So I did it. And oh, you know what? They made me do an outline first. They had me do a 10-page outline, and we played with that for like 3 months. And then they were like, okay, now do a pilot. And I was like, does no one know that I have no idea what I'm doing? And then I did it, and it was actually pretty good. And they were a huge help. But I think when you're doing material you already know, it's much easier. So doing like a spec pilot has been the same thing, where my managers are like, pieces of this are great. Like, I don't know. And like, I don't know why that is. I wish I were more efficient, but I'm not. How about you for screenwriting?
Oh, I've barely done any, so I don't even think I can speak like coherently about it. Like I've written like a 20-minute screenplay for a horror anthology that never happened, and I took one of my short stories, and you read it, 19 Snapshots at Dennisport.
It actually
I think I was trying to be too close to the short story, but it was fine. I mean, but it's also was the kind of screenplay where I was purposely not writing to the form. I sort of like, I don't know, like I think that's going to be a hurdle. Like, I don't know, because I like in fiction, I like doing different narrative techniques, and the idea that everything has to fit like the 3-act structure and you have to have a beat on page 15 or whatever. It's like, I don't think that's it hasn't been like that forever. I don't know why it's become like that now.
No,
but I don't know what the hell I'm talking about either for screenwriting.
No, I think it's just better to be a writer. The thing is, like, you can make a little more money.
Yeah.
Adapting, but like the novels, you have control over it. It's yours forever. And publishers, they will publish it, you know, like as opposed to working on a screenplay forever and they just fade.
Yeah.
Happy times. Okay. Where are we next? Paul, in terms of your narrative voice, who were your biggest influences from Greg Greene? That's a good question.
Oh boy. I don't know. Geez, in general, I mean, like so many of us, like Stephen King was really like the first author that like I read all of his books, and then from him was Clive Barker and Peter Straub. I found myself going back to Peter's work a lot because his sentences are so beautiful. And reading Kurt Vonnegut was, so I feel like a game changer for me because I felt like, oh, you know, not only was it new and exciting because, you know, reading Slaughterhouse-Five for the first time after just reading fairly straightforward narratives, like this is wild. Like he's just saying, it seemed like he was like, this was him on the page. So that was definitely something that I really, that maybe sticks with me. I don't know. I mean, I'm certainly nowhere near Kurt Vonnegut, but the idea that your own person, your own self gets to go in there. So that's definitely something, you know, I like to doing. And actually in reference to Paul Bearers Club though, specifically, I read some Gary Lutz, short story writer. I only discovered him because I saw an interview that Brian Evanson did with him. And apparently like the French translator of Gary Lutz's work was like, it's impossible to translate because he'll make up his own adverbs and stuff, you know, which I do a little bit in the Paul Bearers Club. It was a little bit dangerous reading him because like, if you read him, like you could start, which was, I thought was the genius of his work, is you start thinking like, it feels like you start thinking like him, and it's very off and strange. You know, I had to put it like, I can't read too much of his stuff in a row because it is just so disorienting. But yeah, so that's, I guess, specific to some of the voice in Paul Bearers Club.
That's amazing. I want to read that and be disoriented. All right. Oh, I love the red ink for the parallel narrative in the first edition. Was it hard to talk the publisher into this?
So, it was a little bit hard. I mean, just like the initial shock, even though, like I told my amazing editor, Jennifer Brell, she's my hero. I mean, she pulled me from the heap with, you know, a head full of ghosts, and she's never once like tried to like change any of my books in any like big like way. That's terrible. And she really saved Disappearance at Devil's Rock. So she's the best. And she's a lovable curmudgeon. She would not be angry by me saying that. So when I handed in the book, she was like, oh, I don't know about these, you know, margins things. Like, do we need them? And I was like, yeah, we do. And there wasn't like much pushback beyond that. Even though like she knew, like I had warned her, hey, you know, this thing is going to have margins. So, you know, we shouldn't even talk about ebooks because everyone's at Mysterious Galaxy Books buying hardcovers. But no, Maura went well beyond. Yeah, they went well beyond above and beyond what I thought they would do. Like all I asked for was, hey, we just got to print this as marginally. It can't be, it can't be footnotes. Like people read footnotes or they actually skip over footnotes usually. But also I thought it was important to the story. Like it was there for a purpose. Yeah. So I know it was a lot of extra work for their designers, and it was actually Jen and Morrow said, hey, you know, for the first run of the hardcover, we're going to do it in red. I was like, you are? It's like, great. Like I never even brought that up. Like I turned it in that way, red, but you know, I never said, hey, this is going to be in red. I assumed I just did it for myself just so I could see what it looked like. So no, that was very, very cool of them.
That is really cool. That's nice. You have so many questions.
I'll go quick. I'll stop rambling.
No, you're not rambling at all. I just, unfortunately, all right, I'm going to hit Nick Momadis because he's here.
I see it.
Nick Momadis, yeah. When will horror die again? And it too can, and it can, when will horror die again? And can it be too soon?
It's dying now. I don't know. It's really dying now, Hollywood-wise, I would say. That's not totally fair. I mean, it'll never die. I don't know. Well, I mean, I hate to keep going back to Hollywood. Like, so, I mean, I'm super fortunate to have, you know, my publisher and how they have a very broad view of what horror is, and they've never pushed back on any of the content. You know, the only thing that happens is like maybe they don't market it as horror. I don't really care. Just put the book out. You know, they'll call it psychological suspense. You know, if you notice, it doesn't say horror on the spine or anything, which is fine. I don't care. But like my very anecdotal Hollywood stuff, I've met some really nice people. But I've met some producers and quite a few, like, you know, I'm sure you've had the conversations too, or I had one producer tell me, you know, we really want horror that, you know, that has like a feel-good ending. And I'm just like, those are two different things that you're asking for there.
Yeah.
Sir.
No, they'll.
So that's my fear, is the Scooby-Dooization of horror. You know, because it is so popular, you get sort of imitators, you know, at the same time as we're getting all these wonderful, like, you know, own voices and new voices into horror. I fear the glut of like, oh, we're just going to put out cheap and easy, feel good stuff. And that will kill horror. And then Nick will be happy.
Well, I think we've got 5 years before the glut makes people hate it. And we're hitting like 70s like economic crisis. So I think we have a ride. I think we're going to be okay for a while. Okay, so how do you establish place? How do you create settings so layered with menace and from B to Z, YK?
I want you definitely have to answer that, because I'm only being partly jokey, glib when I say like I'm a lazy researcher. Almost all of my stories are set in New England just because, you know, I know it so well. But also, I mean, because like if you say New England Gothic horror story, most people, you know, most readers anyway, have an idea in their head what that is. So it's fun to try to play with those expectations, either lean into them or undercut them in some way. But yeah, I know, you know, I'm not going to be doing like an Antarctic research sort of novel anytime soon, just because the idea of that amount of research is scary to me.
Yeah.
But how about you? I mean, you did, you know, with Good Neighbors, I mean, you took a town or an area that's sort of familiar too.
It was a jumping point. It was Garden City, but sort of not. It was sort of like a more middle-class version of the town I grew up in. And it was a cul-de-sac, and it was sort of like, I sort of made it my childhood and then sort of gave them the trappings of a more adult or more modern
But your new book sounds like it's in a totally different, well, it's a little bit near future-ish too, right?
Yeah, no, the new book is completely different. It's a setting, it's actually the end of the 21st century. So it's like, you know, 70 years from now.
We make it that long? Yay.
Some of us.
Some of us.
Yeah, no, I think it's just like trial and error. I don't know. Like you kind of write it down, you see if it sounds good, and then you kind of change the words around until they do. That's my craft.
I guess I would just say, since I didn't really answer the question, that, you know, I try to make it seem real, at least real to me, and then have things just be a little bit off. I mean, that's how you could really sort of make any place feel menacey. Menacey, is that a word? Oh my God, we're not ending on menacey, are we?
Menacey. I think the real world details. The more you can make something seem non-dramatic, non-emotional, just descriptive, and then throw in the crazy shit, the more people believe it.
Mm.
All right. Sorry to interrupt, but we have hit our hour mark. I know there's still some questions withstanding, but there are so many people that threw in those questions, and bless you for doing it. And what great questions too. Paul.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Yes, just the way you described the Paul Bearers Club. I can't wait to eventually read this. I was telling Paul in the green room before we got started. As many of you probably know who tuning in, one of our booksellers in the store, our resident horror guru, Rob, loved the Paul Bearers Club, and he's absolutely praising it right now. So again, if you haven't yet gotten your copy, it is a great opportunity to do so. Click the link below. It takes you to the website. Yes, hit my microphone. Hit the link below. It'll take you to our website where you can get your own copy, and we'll make sure to get you a signed book plate from Paul. Not only that, but we also have Good Neighbors on there, so you can get that from Sarah. With that, I unfortunately have to wish a good night to everyone, or good day. I don't know what time it is where everyone's tuning in. But Paul and Sarah, thank you so much for doing this. This is wonderful.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Yay! Thank you.
Yay. Clive Barker rules.
Love it. All right, everyone. I hope you all have a good day, and we'll see you for the next virtual event. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.